Life has a way of shattering into pieces when you least expect it. One moment, I'm standing in my parents' living room, surrounded by pink and blue balloons at what's supposed to be my sister's baby shower. The next, she's holding up a worn photograph with trembling hands, her smile both triumphant and cruel. "Remember that night you thought he was working late," she whispers, just loud enough for me to hear. The image shows my late husband outside a hotel I've never seen before, and suddenly every memory I thought I could trust begins to unravel. I'm Jessica Anderson, and 6 months ago, my husband David died in a car accident that left his body too damaged for an open casket. Now, at 37, I'm standing here, gripping the back of a chair so hard my knuckles have turned white, trying to process my sister Lisa's words as they echo through the suddenly silent room. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had their full attention. "Jessica, tell us more about that new project you're working on," Dad would say, actually interested in my work for once. "The marketing campaign's going well," I'd share, savoring these moments of connection. "My boss thinks it might bring in several new clients." The world tilts sideways. Through the roaring in my ears, I hear gasps and whispers. Aunt Janet's hand flies to her mouth. Lisa's college friends huddle closer together, their eyes wide with shock. But what hits me hardest is the complete lack of surprise on my parents' faces. They knew. They had known all along. That's how my story begins, not with David's death, which was its own kind of devastation, but with this moment of betrayal that would force me to question everything I thought I knew about family, love, and truth. The first few weeks after David's death had been a blur of funeral arrangements, consoling phone calls, and sleepless nights. If it hadn't been for my parents stepping in to handle most of the funeral details, I'm not sure how I would have managed. "Jessica, honey, we've arranged everything with the funeral home," Mom had said, her voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. "You just focus on yourself right now." Looking back, I wonder if that gentleness was born of guilt, knowing what they were hiding. The grief support group for people who lost loved ones became my lifeline. Every Tuesday evening, I'd sit in a circle with others who understood the hollow ache in my chest. Rachel, who lost her husband 2 years ago, would often reach across and squeeze my hand when words failed me. "Some days are harder than others," I shared during one session, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I wake up and for a split second, I forget he's gone." I threw myself into practical matters. David had left me well provided for, our house in the suburbs, an apartment downtown, and a substantial bank account. I could have quit my job at the tech firm where I worked as a project manager, but the thought of sitting alone in our empty house all day made my skin crawl. Instead, I switched to part-time, working just enough to keep my mind occupied. The most surprising change came in my relationship with my parents. Growing up, I'd always felt like an afterthought compared to Lisa. They never missed her dance recitals or school plays, while my academic achievements barely warranted a congratulations. But after David's death, something shifted. When they asked if I could help them financially with a monthly transfer of $1,500, I agreed without hesitation. The weekly dinners at my parents' house had become a comforting routine. Mom would cook her famous pot roast, Dad would pour the wine, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had their full attention. "Jessica, tell us more about that new project you're working on," Dad would say, actually interested in my work for once. "The marketing campaign's going well," I'd share, savoring these moments of connection. "My boss thinks it might bring in several new clients." But everything shifted the night Lisa joined us for dinner. My younger sister walked in 7 months pregnant, her presence immediately commanding the room like it always had. She'd been living in a rented apartment across town, and I hadn't seen her since David's funeral. "Lisa, sweetie, sit here," Mom fussed, practically pushing me aside to make room for her favorite daughter. "Do you need another pillow? Are your feet swollen?" Just like that, I became invisible again. It was like watching a switch flip, suddenly all their attention laser-focused on Lisa and her pregnancy. The familiar ache of being overlooked settled back into my chest, an old friend I'd foolishly thought I'd left behind. "So who's the father?" I asked during dinner, trying to join the conversation. "Have you told him about the baby?" Lisa's face darkened. "That's my business," she snapped, pushing her peas around her plate. I don't need to share every detail of my personal life. Mom jumped to her defense immediately. Jessica, don't pry. Your sister doesn't have to explain herself to anyone. I couldn't help but notice how different this response was from when I was going through fertility treatments. Back then, they'd had no problem demanding updates and offering unsolicited advice about my personal life. The call from Lisa came on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk reviewing project timelines when my phone lit up with her name. I almost let it go to voicemail. Our conversations were usually brief and awkward, but something made me answer. Jessica, her voice had that sugary sweetness she only used when she wanted something. I'm having my baby shower next weekend at Mom and Dad's. I'd really love it if you could come. The invitation caught me off guard. The last real conversation we'd had was at David's funeral, and even then she'd seemed distracted and uncomfortable. Are you sure? I asked, unable to hide my surprise. I could count on one hand the number of times Lisa had voluntarily included me in anything. Of course, she laughed, the sound oddly forced. You're my only sister. It wouldn't be right without you. Plus, I have something special planned. Something in her tone made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. I'll be there, I promised, already mentally listing possible gift ideas. Maybe this was her way of trying to bridge the gap between us. The following Saturday, I arrived at my parents' house carrying 2 carefully wrapped packages, a high-end baby monitor and a handmade blanket. Despite our differences, this was my future niece or nephew. The place looked like a pastel explosion had hit it, pink and blue balloons everywhere, streamers hanging from every surface, and a towering diaper cake centerpiece. Trust Lisa to turn this into an event. She'd invited what looked like half the town. Aunt Janet was there with her daughters, Mom's bridge club friends occupied the sofa, and Lisa's old college roommates clustered around the punch bowl, giggling over some shared memory. Time for games. Lisa announced, wading through the crowd in a flowing maternity dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was glowing, but there was something predatory in her smile that made me uneasy. Her eyes kept finding mine across the room, holding my gaze a beat too long. We played all the traditional baby shower games, measuring Lisa's belly with string, guessing the baby's birth date, and that horrible melted chocolate bar in diaper game. I won the belly measuring contest, which seemed to irritate Lisa more than it should have. Throughout it all, she kept shooting these strange looks my way, like she was waiting for something. After the gifts were opened, Lisa crooning over each onesie and baby gadget with theatrical enthusiasm, she reached my presence. She held up the blanket, running her fingers over the intricate pattern, then clinked her glass for attention. The room fell silent, and my heart started racing for no reason I could name. The air felt suddenly thick, hard to breathe. I want to thank everyone for coming today, she began, one hand resting on her swollen belly. But there's something else I need to share. I think it's time everyone knew who the father of my baby is. My heart started pounding. Lisa's eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I knew. I knew before the words left her mouth, but that didn't lessen the impact. The father, she said, her voice ringing through the suddenly silent room, is David Anderson. Jessica's late husband. The world spins sideways. Through the roaring in my ears, I can hear gasps and whispers from the guests. Aunt Janet's hand flies to her mouth. Lisa's college friends huddle closer together, whispering frantically. But what hits me hardest is the lack of surprise on my parents' faces. They had known all along. Before I can process what's happening, Lisa is already speaking again, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she turns to face me directly. As David's baby's only heir, I'm entitled to half of everything he left you, Jessica. The house, the apartment, the money, my child deserves their father's inheritance. The room spins. I grip the back of a chair to steady myself, but then Mom and Dad step forward, flanking Lisa like bodyguards. Jessica, Dad says, using his stern business voice, you need to do the right thing here. Your nephew deserves his father's legacy. I find my voice, though it comes out as a rasp. You're lying. All of you are lying. David would never. Oh no. Lisa's smile turns cruel as she pulls out her phone. Then how do you explain these? She holds up the screen, and my world collapses all over again. There they are, David and Lisa wrapped in each other's arms, kissing in what looks like a hotel room. Another photo shows them holding hands in a restaurant I don't recognize. He loved me, Lisa declares, her voice carrying across the silent room. He was planning to leave you for me. We were going to tell everyone, but then. She chokes, looks up, tears streaming down her face. Then the accident happened, and all our plans. I can't breathe. Can't think. My body moves on autopilot, gathering my purse, pushing past the whispering guests, stumbling out to my car. I hear Mom calling after me, but I'm already backing out of the driveway. The drive home is a blur, my mind keeps replaying those photos, trying to make sense of them. The restaurant photos must have been taken during those business dinners he claimed to have, the hotel probably during his frequent work trips. My phone starts buzzing as soon as I walk through my front door. Lisa is sending messages, dozens of them, screenshots of conversations between her and David. I don't love her anymore. I haven't for a long time. We'll tell everyone after the divorce. You're the only one I want to be with. I can't wait to start our life together. Message after message appears on my screen, each one a fresh knife in my heart. The timestamps show conversations going back months, my husband and my sister plotting their future while I underwent fertility treatments, believing I was the problem in our marriage. I spend that night pacing through my house, touching David's things and wondering if everything about our life together had been a lie. The first call from my parents comes at 7 a.m. sharp. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Jessica, you need to be reasonable about this, Dad starts, not even bothering with a greeting. The sooner you agree to split the inheritance, the easier this will be for everyone. The casual arrogance in his voice makes my blood boil. Easier for whom? For all of us, Mom chimes in, I'm on speakerphone. You don't want this to get messy, dear. When? The word comes out as barely more than a whisper. When did you know about them? There's a pause, the kind of hesitation that tells you everything you need to know before a word is spoken. We've known for a while, Mom finally admits. David confided in us about 6 months before the accident. The timeline hits me like a physical blow. 6 months. They'd known for 6 months and still let me cry on their shoulders at his funeral. Still accepted my money every month while knowing what he and Lisa had done. Traitors, the word feels cold and final on my tongue. All of you. I hang up and block their numbers. My hand shakes as I open my banking app, but I don't hesitate to cancel the monthly transfer to their account. Let them ask their precious Lisa for money. 2 weeks pass in a fog of missed calls and ignored text messages. Then comes Lisa's email, she'll sue me if I don't voluntarily give up half of everything. The word voluntarily has never looked so much like a curse. I can't bear to reply, can't bear to think about David's betrayal, about how many people must have known, must have seen them together while I remained oblivious. The whispers at work become unbearable, pitying looks from some colleagues, barely concealed smirks from others. Tom, my boss and one of the few true friends I have left, calls me into his office after I break down in the middle of a client meeting. Take some time off, he says gently. Paid or unpaid, whatever works for you. Your job will be here when you're ready to come back. I nod gratefully and pack up my desk that same day. The next few weeks blur together as I become a hermit in my own home. I have groceries delivered, ignore the doorbell when it rings, and spend hours staring at old photos, trying to spot the signs I must have missed. Every happy memory now feels like a mockery, every moment of our marriage tainted by the knowledge that he had been living a double life with my own sister. The news comes via Facebook, Lisa has given birth to a boy. The photo shows her beaming in a hospital bed, our parents hovering proudly over their new grandson. The baby is wrapped in the cream-colored blanket I had knitted for the shower, which feels like a deliberate jab. I close the app before I can read the comments, but not before noticing she's named him David Jr. A week later, the court summons arrives in a thick manila envelope. My hands tremble as I open it, already knowing what I'll find inside. Lisa is suing for half of everything David left me, claiming her son's right to his father's inheritance. The legal language is cold and precise, laying out her demands in stark black and white. She wants the house, half the money, and partial ownership of the downtown apartment. I spend 3 days researching lawyers before settling on Richard Martinez, who comes highly recommended for handling complex inheritance cases. Miss Anderson, he says, shuffling through the papers on his desk, his expression carefully neutral. I have to be honest with you. Your sister has compelling evidence of a long-term relationship with your late husband, text messages, photos, witness statements including your own parents. He pauses, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. In inheritance cases like this, proof of an intimate relationship combined with a biological child, well, the courts tend to be sympathetic. I'm still processing this devastating news when my phone rings that evening, unknown number. Hello, is this Jessica Anderson? A woman's voice, unfamiliar but somehow striking a chord of recognition. Something in the cadence, the tone, makes my heart skip. I'm Margaret Wilson. David's mother. The world tilts sideways. I grip the Kitsmith counter for support. That's impossible, I whisper. David was an orphan. He told me his parents died when he was young. He grew up in foster care. Another one of his lies, I'm afraid. Her voice is bitter but not unkind. Would you be willing to meet with me? There are things you need to know. Things that might help you. We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown the next morning, neutral ground. I arrive early, order a coffee I can't drink, and nearly drop the cup when she walks in. The resemblance is uncanny. David had her eyes, her smile, even the way she carries herself. She moves with the same fluid grace I'd always admired in him. I was at the funeral, she says after we've settled into a corner booth far from curious ears. Back row, black dress and veil. I couldn't bring myself to approach you then. David and I hadn't spoken in years. I remember her suddenly, the solitary figure who'd slipped out before the service ended. I'd been too lost in my own grief to wonder who she was, but now the memory crystallizes with perfect clarity, the elegant woman in black standing apart from the other mourners, her face hidden behind a dark veil. Why are you coming forward now? I ask, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. After all the recent revelations about David, I find it hard to trust anything or anyone connected to him. Margaret reaches into her handbag and pulls out a manila envelope, worn at the edges as if it had been carried around for a long time. Because I've heard about what your sister is claiming, and because despite everything, I can't let another woman suffer from my son's lies. Her fingers tremble slightly as she slides the envelope across the table. With trembling hands, I open the envelope Margaret has given me. Inside are medical records from Boston General Hospital, dated 10 years ago, about a year before David and I got married. My eyes scan the document, and I feel the blood drain from my face, complete azoospermia, permanently sterile, no possibility of natural conception. The clinical terms jump out at me, each one a fresh blow. David had these tests done when he was 25, Margaret explains softly. He was devastated by the results. It was one of the last things we discussed before our falling out. I can't speak. All those years of fertility treatments, the endless doctor's appointments, the hormone injections, the tears, and self-blame, it had all been a cruel charade. The courtroom is packed on the day of the hearing. Lisa sits in the front row, cradling baby David Jr. while our parents flank her protectively. She's dressed the part of a grieving almost widow perfectly, demure black dress, minimal makeup, practiced look of sorrow. When she takes the stand, she plays to the gallery masterfully, tears glistening in her eyes as she describes her "a great love" with David. All I want is what's fair for my son, she declares, her voice breaking. He deserves his father's legacy. My lawyer, Mr. Martinez, waits until she's finished her performance before he speaks. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that proves Miss Smith's entire claim is fraudulent. He approaches the bench with the hospital records. The judge reviews the documents, her expression unchanging. Lisa's lawyer jumps up, objecting about chain of custody and document authenticity. Lisa's composure cracks. Those documents are fake, she shrieks, clutching the baby closer. She forged them to steal my baby's inheritance. Your Honor, Mr. Martinez continues calmly. Given these medical records show Mr. Anderson was sterile, we request a DNA test to establish paternity. Lisa's smile is triumphant. That's impossible. David was an orphan, and his body was cremated. There's no one to test against. Actually, Mr. Martinez says, gesturing to the gallery, I'd like to introduce Margaret Wilson, David Anderson's biological mother. Margaret stands, and a murmur runs through the courtroom. Even from where I sit, I can see Lisa's face turn ashen. I'm willing to submit to a DNA test, Margaret announces clearly, to determine if this child is my grandson. The judge nods. DNA testing is ordered. We'll reconvene when the results are available. Lisa sways slightly in her seat, all color drained from her face. Our mother rushes to support her, shooting me a venomous look, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I feel hope. The courtroom is silent as the judge opens the envelope containing the DNA test results. Lisa sits rigidly in her chair, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the drama unfolding around him. The results conclusively show, the judge announces, her voice clear and firm, that there is no genetic relationship between the minor child and Mrs. Margaret Wilson. Therefore, it can be concluded that David Anderson was not the father of this child. A collective gasp fills the room. Lisa's face crumples as she begins to sob, mascara running down her cheeks. Miss Smith, the judge's voice has turned stern, would you care to explain why you perpetrated this fraud upon the court? Lisa clutches the baby closer, her voice barely above a whisper. I was seeing several men at the time. When David died and was cremated, I thought no one would ever know. He had money, and I needed. So you attempted to defraud your own sister? The judge's disapproval is palpable, used your parents as unwitting accomplices in this scheme. I just wanted security for my baby, Lisa whimpers, but her performance has lost its power. Even our parents look stunned, finally realizing the extent of her deception. The judge's ruling is swift and unequivocal. This court finds in favor of the defendant, Jessica Anderson. All claims to Anderson's estate by Lisa Smith are dismissed with prejudice. Miss Smith, you're fortunate that Mrs. Anderson hasn't pressed criminal charges for attempted fraud. Outside the courthouse, my parents approach me. Mom is crying, Dad looking older than I've ever seen him. Jessica, sweetheart, Mom reaches for my hand, we had no idea Lisa was lying. We can make this right. We've been struggling since you stopped the monthly transfers. I hold up my hand. Don't. Just don't. I pull out my phone, block their numbers right there, and walk away without looking back. Margaret is waiting by my car. Are you okay? She asks softly. I surprise myself by laughing. You know what? I think I actually am. Or I will be. I take a deep breath. I've been thinking, that apartment downtown that David left me. I never liked it much. Too many memories. But maybe you'd like it? Her eyes widen. Jessica, no. I couldn't possibly. Please, I insist. You gave me back my life with those medical records. Let me give you something in return. When I hand her the keys a week later, she breaks down crying. I never thought I'd have a daughter, she whispers as she hugs me. That was 3 months ago. My family still tries to reach me through mutual friends and distant relatives, but I've cut those ties too. Lisa sent a letter claiming she's changed, that she's sorry, that she needs help with the baby. I threw it away unopened. Instead, I have weekly dinners with Margaret. We're getting to know each other, sharing stories about David, the good and the bad. She's helping me see that while he wasn't the man I thought he was, that doesn't invalidate all the happy moments we shared. Yesterday, I finally packed away David's remaining things. Margaret helped me donate some to charity and store others in the attic. As we worked, she told me stories about David as a little boy before the lies began. It helps somehow to know that version of him existed. The process of sorting through his belongings brought back memories, both painful and precious. I found the card he gave me on our first anniversary, his handwriting declaring eternal love. A lie, yes, but the happiness I felt that day was real. I discovered his old running shoes, still caked with mud from our last hike together. The weather had been perfect that day, and his laughter had echoed through the trees. Another memory now tinged with doubt, but the joy of that moment was genuine. He wasn't always like this, Margaret told me as we folded his old college sweatshirt. The lying, it started small. Little things at first, then bigger and bigger. By the time I confronted him about it, he'd built such a web of deception that he couldn't find his way back to the truth. Understanding doesn't erase the pain, but it helps me make peace with it. David was neither the perfect husband I thought I had nor the complete monster his betrayal suggested. He was human, deeply flawed, caught in his own web of lies. I'm not ready to date yet, but I've started living again. I returned to work full-time, surprising myself with how much I'd missed the challenge and structure. Tom, my boss, welcomed me back with quiet understanding and a stack of interesting new projects. The whispers at work have died down, replaced by genuine concern and support. Rachel from accounting often joins me for lunch, sharing stories about how she rebuilt her life after her divorce. It's different from my situation, but the process of starting over resonates. I've joined a hiking club, reclaiming an activity I'd always loved but had associated too strongly with David. Last weekend, I led my first group hike. Standing on the summit, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. I'm planning my first solo vacation, a 2-week trip to the coast. No detailed itinerary, no preset expectations. Just me, the ocean, and the freedom to rediscover who I am without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I barely recognize the woman looking back at me. She's stronger than the person I was before, more cautious perhaps, but also more authentic. The pain has carved new depths in me, but those spaces are gradually filling with wisdom and self-discovery. Tomorrow, I'll wake up early and hike to that summit again. I'll watch another sunrise, but this time, I won't be looking for peace. I already have it. Instead, I'll be greeting the dawn as Jessica Anderson, not David's widow, not Lisa's sister, not the woman who was betrayed. Just me. And for the first time in my life, that feels like more than enough.